Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello, my name is Jasmine. I used to make a lot of videos for this channel. I recently decided to start uploading on this channel again. I think it kind of went through a phase where I was just confused and I didn't really know what else to do with this channel. Since I'm working on the AquaMan drawing, I thought it would be a good idea to go over the techniques and stuff every step of the way. That way you can see how it all comes together, and I know I did a lot of drawing videos on just the drawing phase of this piece because it's so detailed, and I finally decided to color it after much procrastination, so here we are. So I've decided to start drawing the eye area where the brow ridge is, since that's where the darkest shadows are on the face besides the nostrils. The nostrils are usually what I color second. So here, as you can see, I'm doing the outline in pure black for this part of the face. So for certain parts of the face, I do use black. That's only for the absolute darkest parts of the face. Where other areas of the face look like they're black, I will usually make a natural black out of one of the dark greens and then the perylene brown. And instead of just using solid lines to draw, I make little scribbly lines, and that way it kind of looks like eyelashes. The other thing that I use to make a natural black is a really dark blue, like an indigo blue mixed with orange. It really just depends on which part of the face I'm working on and how far I want to set it back in space. It also depends on the warmth. If I want it more warm, I will use the blue and orange. If I want a cooler tone shadows, then I will use a really dark red. Sometimes I'll use a bright red with a green, or a bright red with a dark green, or a bright green with a dark red. It just depends on what I'm looking to achieve as far as the shadows on the face go and how much depth I want for that shadow. Quit scratching the carpet. This cat is driving me crazy. Next, I'm using a very pale color. I have all my pencils here. One second. The color that I start to use on the eyes is the raw umber 10%. This piece is being done entirely in Caran d'Ache, so that's the colors that I'm referring to when I'm talking about this. Raw umber 10% is a very light brown. It's almost white, and I really like this pencil for eyes because you can still get good depth with the eyes when you use this mixed with white and one of the grays, either a warm tone gray or a cool tone gray. You can get a lot of dimension even in the white of the eyeball. The other color that I really like to use for the eyes, depending on what highlight I'm trying to put on the eyes, would be the Buff Titanium, which is a really creamy white pencil. It's not quite white, it's pretty close, and I really like using that one when I want a softer highlight either on eyes or on skin. Sometimes I use it when I'm putting highlights on the nose, and I use a lot of pointillism in my pieces. When you look at them up close, you can see a lot of dots, but when you look at it further away, it just looks like a normal drawing. Pointillism allows you to add more detail to the skin. Once I have all of the skin tone down on this side of the face, I will go back in with more pencils and add more dots, and then I will use the battery eraser to erase teeny tiny highlights and add another color in that place that is really close to the skin tone, but I'll go over that kind of towards the end of this video. And right now I'm just getting the eyelids to be set back in space, so those I almost have to use a solid black line, and then I kind of flare it out a little bit to start creating the brows, because Jason Momoa's brows in this particular picture are very close down because he's kind of looking down, so his eyebrows are kind of tilted down. And then I use pointillism with the black pencil to get a little bit of depth on both sides of the eyelid, both corners. Once I go over that with the browns later, it will make the eye look more round. And here I am again doing the same thing that I mentioned earlier with the eyelashes, where I used a little scribble lines instead of perfectly straight eyelash lines, and that way I can fill in the space where the eyelid is so it looks a little bit thicker and it starts to give you a good base to create a shadow under the eyelashes. Once again, that creates more depth on the eye and the pupil. For the pupils, I started to outline them in a gray. It looks like the outside of his pupils are either a very bluish gray or just a very dark warm gray. I didn't want to add too much there because I don't want the eyes to look like they're being outlined, but I still want them to kind of be outlined but a little bit more subtle. The character's eyes are extremely pale, and the gray allows the blue of the eye to be set back against the white of the eye without them getting too muddied together. That makes sense. And then before I start coloring the part of the pupil where the brightest colors are, I will go over it with the battery eraser just to make sure that the area is clean, because when I start laying down the pencil, I don't want any little like pencil specks to make the color really weird or cause any streaks. So that's why you see me going over it with the battery eraser, and then the buff titanium. So I use the buff titanium as a base for the blue, and then I use the palest blue color that Caran d'Ache makes. So the palest color that Caran d'Ache makes is the light cobalt blue. It's a sky blue. Actually, it's a little bit paler than a sky blue, but it was perfect for the eyes. And here I am again using pointillism with the gray pencil to start adding a little bit more depth to the outline of the pupils. After that, I went in with a very pale blue around the edges of the eyes, and that one is called Payne's Gray 30%. It is a very cool, I think this is a cool toned pale blue. It's a very interesting color. It's not a bright color blue, but it's pale enough to where like when you mix it with white, it still looks like it's not like overly blue. It's like a muted blue. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of gray in this stage. There's a lot of ways to make gray. I don't like mixing gray when I'm doing shadows on the eyes. It starts to look a little bit weird, and I want to make sure the area is very, very smooth so that it resembles an eye. For that part, if I need to use gray, I will just use gray instead of making a gray with two other colors plus white. Pointillism really comes in handy. If you don't use that now, I would highly suggest experimenting with that. Once I got the base colors down for the eye, I went in with the indigo blue again over the area that I colored with buff titanium and the pale blue. I went over that with the indigo blue in little small sections, and then I blended those areas out either with white or with buff titanium. I think it was white, and I was trying to get a little bit more of a blue hue without adding like another milky layer of pencil. I want them to be piercing blue eyes so that they stand out really well. Once I get the skin colored in, it will make sense as to why I'm coloring this way, to make sure that the eyes stand out, make sure that his beard stands out, because his beard is going to be very, very dark. Once I add the beard and then the nose and then the highlights like on his forehead, everything on his face is going to pop, and the eyes have to be like set a certain way. The nose has to be also set a certain way. So it looks like the tip of his nose is closer to you. It looks like his eyebrows are a little bit closer, so those have to be set apart from the eyes as well. So you're still creating a shadow under the eye, but because the eye is so pale, you still have to color it a little bit more pale and still put a shadow above where the eyelash line is. I don't particularly like coloring eyes, but I also don't like coloring beards either. But I decided to put myself through this because I really wanted to draw him years ago. I just felt like the suit was really intimidating to do. It took so long to draw out, and it was just something that I worked on here and there. So I've been working on this drawing off and on since 2019, and every year I was like, you know what, this is going to be the year that I'm going to color it. Like, this is going to be the year. And then I ended up doing other stuff. I did the Henry Cavill drawing, I did a Barbie drawing, I did some other stuff, and then I had Comic-Con, and then there was just too much stuff that I wanted to do, so I had to kind of set this aside. But I'm really glad that I'm working on it now. And in this part, you can see where I'm going over that with the X-Acto knife. I'm trying to etch away a little bit of the highlights. So where I am etching away, I'm going to be adding white again. This is a layering process. So every layer that you add on, you want to make sure that you're coloring either in really, really small circles or coloring in very, very light layers. That will help you layer the color better. It helps the pencil to adhere to the paper better. The appearance of it just looks more smooth. Everything looks more uniform, and that's what we want when we're doing this type of realism. We want to make sure that the skin looks like skin. The skin has the texture of somebody's skin with the pores and the highlights and stuff, and the moles or the facial hair. If you want stuff like that to look realistic, you want to make sure that you have a good base accurate to what the person actually looks like. And then I use pointillism to kind of block in the inner corner of the eyelid, because that is going to be the section where I am going to have to use a little bit of black to blend with either like a red or pink to get the tear ducts. Underneath the eyelid, you can underneath the brow, you can kind of see where I start to color the brow ridge. I darkened the area. I started with a little bit of black, and then I would think I went over that with the dark flesh or the sepia or both. It's kind of hard to tell which one I used from here. This is a process that I repeat over and over again. Once I've kind of started to block in a little bit. If the corner of the faces are too dark, like the sides where the ears are, and I need a reference, something that I can kind of use as a contrast, then I'll start coloring the outline of the person's face a little bit, just so that my brain understands which part of the face is the darkest and which part is the lightest. Sometimes you get kind of carried away and your brain doesn't really understand how dark you need to make the shadows or how dark you need to make certain colors. Because his face is two colors, it does get a little bit challenging. Left side of his face, which would be like my left, not his, that side would be the darkest because it is facing away from the light, and I want to make sure that that side of the face is actually going to be darker in order to keep my brain from trying to color the whole face the same shade. That is what I do so that my brain understands that this is the color that is closer to black, this color is further away from black. That's going to be like the most prominent thing, like it's closer to you. And once again, I'm going over the outline of the pupils with a, I think that's either dark gray or black. That might be a brown pencil. And sometimes with certain shades of brown, if you use them on a blue eye, it actually makes the blue pop out a little bit more. If you're using a warm tone brown, you'll notice that it contrasts really well against the blue. And I believe I use that for part of the outline or maybe the bottom of the pupil. So one of the colors I use most frequently is the burnt ochre 50%. It's kind of like a peach color, but it's a little bit more bold than a peach color. I use that a lot when I'm doing the pointillism and adding in the skin texture. Two of the other colors that I use really frequently when I'm drawing somebody that has a lot of warm tones in their face are the brown ochre and the burnt ochre. One is like a golden tan and the other one is more of an orangey tan. I really like those because they mix really well with purple shades. If you get like a muted purple pencil, you can add a really good shadows on the face just using either of those warm orangey colors with one of the purple pencils. And mapping out where the nostrils are is a great way to map the face because that will allow you to understand where the nose is facing and where the shiny part of the nose will be and the bridge. His nostrils are a little bit sideways because of how he's standing and the angle at which they took the pictures. So his nostrils are not going to be completely symmetrical for that reason. Once again, I'm coloring part of the side of the face so that I can block in some of the dark color where his hair is. But this would be the part of the hair that is further away, almost like it's behind his neck. So that's not going to have a whole lot of color in it. It doesn't really matter if you color that part pure black because it's just not visible. There's no visible strands of hair. It does help you do the brown hair that's going to be closer to you, and that will help you set that apart so you can kind of give the illusion that he has thick hair, which he does, but I want that to come across in the drawing. I'd like to also go around the pupil with a white pencil to kind of blend the pupil in a little bit with the eye. It doesn't have such a harsh contrast. That way it looks like the eye is like there, but it doesn't look like it's animated. That's one thing you have to be really careful with when you're using a lot of black. You have to be very strategic. You really have to have a lot of practice and know what you're doing, because if you use a lot of black, it can start to look more cartoonish, and I do not want that at all. I want this to look as realistic as possible, but I want it to still be in my style, and that is why I do that. So mapping out the bottom of the eyelid, and we want the eyelid to look like it's sticking to the eye, and with that I would use one of the darker brown colors, probably the dark flesh color, because it's not quite as dark as sepia. The other color that I use a lot for like the corners of the face, or if I want to start setting shadows back and I want the tone of the skin to change very slightly, I will use this other color, and that is called French Gray 30%. That is a warm medium gray. I think it's great for adding a lot of texture to skin. I use it a lot when I have to do like stubble. I use it a lot when I need to blend certain shadows onto the skin and still have a little bit of highlight left. I think it's a great color. It's very commonly used. I go through a lot of these besides the black and white pencils. And this is a part part where I start doing the eyelids, I am once again using a black pencil. That is to darken the skin just a little tiny bit. That will give me a good base to lay the other colors down. I like to use a lot of layers. I don't like coloring super heavy unless I'm coloring one area that is just one solid color, and that does not happen very frequently. So that's why I color in a lot of light layers. It ends up looking a lot smoother and the blending ends up being a lot easier. For the other eye, I decided to do some more pointillism to bring the corner of the eye back, and I use a darker color to do that. I believe I use either dark flesh or sepia again. I use those a lot for this stage of the drawing, and then I start using pointillism to add in the darker parts of where the nose starts to fall, and that way when I use the actual skin tones, it automatically looks like the skin is darker on that side. But I'll cover that in the next video. Well, thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this. I'm going to try to make a lot more tutorials. These seem to be pretty easy for me to make, so I can make a lot of these. I can edit these pretty quickly. But thank you again for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!